A demon lives in this city, Mr. Holmes.
What is over there?
A trip from which you will never return, Watson. Trust me, don't go there. Beyond that threshold is an abyss. Hell. He is an angry man in despair following a mistake that cannot be fixed.
My goodness, Holmes, it was a slaughter.
Hi everyone, and finally welcome back to Sherlock Holmes vs. Jack the Ripper.
Good evening. I hope I'm not disturbing you.
Not at all, Doctor. This man, Mr. Richardson, is a witness to the horrid affair at 29 Hanbury Street, the murder of Annie Chapman. We are discussing the relevance of his testimony.
You're probably not in a position to discuss it with me, but I would like to know more about what you call the relevance of this young man's testimony.
Oh, there's no secrecy. It's simply that the testimony given by Mr. Richardson doesn't match the time of death given by the coroner, Dr. Phillips.
What was the time of death, according to him?
Before 4:30 in the morning.
My conclusions were the same. Were there any other conflicting testimonies?
Well, 2 other witnesses summoned at the preliminary inquest gave testimony, but in these cases too, the times don't match.
Do you remember what it was they said?
I didn't question them myself. A colleague of mine took down their statements on paper, but on deciding they were of little use, he tore them up and threw them in the bin. There's no point in being bogged down with useless paperwork.
I will take my leave, Humphreys.
Goodbye, Doctor.
So multiple testimonies, but no agreement. Let's see what the witness has to say.
May I introduce myself? I'm Dr. Watson. I am...
You wouldn't be the chap what writes the detective stories in that there paper?
Well, yes, indeed, my stories have been published in the Strand.
Go blimey, wanna tell me old mum?
It would seem your testimony is the subject of some debate. Could you tell me what it was about?
They'll be telling I'm a bit befuddled about the times that I told them. But it can't be so. I knows what I sees and what I don't sees that morning.
What did you see, or what didn't you see? And at what time, would you say?
I'll tell you this for nothing. It's me old mum who lives at the house where the body was found out back in the garden. She has her shop at the bottom to the right of the stairs. Her door was broken down not too far back because it's a real zoo it is. Right, the morning it happened, I head that way to see if me old mum has finally had the place broken into. It was 4:45 when I got there. That I'll swear on me dear old mum's life. I had a look round to see if the cellar had been taken. No. I had a little sit down on the stairs by the courtyard because me shoes were causing me no end of pain and I had a cut and all. I didn't seize a single thing below the steps, Doctor, not one single thing. If there was some bird all covered in blood, tain't no how I could have missed that, even if it were night time. Right, 5 minutes after getting to number 29, I had to clip off. And now they tells me that either I can't tell time no more, or I was fixing me loafer next to a stiff that was still steaming. All right then. Evening, gents.
The witness we've just heard there, John Richardson, was actually interviewed by the coroner regarding Annie Chapman's murder, and especially the fact that he was fixing his leather shoe with a knife near number 29 Hanbury Street did go against him for some time, but after that there was very little to pin him to anything and he was released shortly afterwards. But his testimony as in the game is pretty much accurate. So now we move on to trying to piece together this information that has been left to us by these 2 witnesses. The first thing that we find on the floor here is something that seems to be rather arbitrary, but as with things in most Sherlock Holmes games, the smallest thing can actually lead to some big conclusions down the road. But here we're seeing what looks to be a petty theft with 4 individuals involved.
An old report on arrests that took place a few years earlier.
Strange that it's still in the bin.
Here are the ripped statements. I can piece them together again.
Now, this is a fairly simple puzzle beating, so what I'm just going to do is speed up solving it. I'll put it up to about 4 times here, so therefore you can see me getting through this fairly quickly rather than sitting around for 5 minutes while I'm trying to get everything done. You can tell pretty much by the handwriting which ones we've got, and we have 2 witness statements here. The first is from an Elizabeth Long, and the second is from an Albert Cadosh. Now, these are probably, if you're a student of Jack the Ripper, you will probably, or the Ripper killings as it were, you will know pretty well of these 2 testimonies where they pretty much contradict
all
each
done.
other.
Holmes couldn't have done better himself.
Yes, unfortunately, these testimonies do somewhat contradict each other. We have the testimony of Elizabeth Long here, describing the individual who she saw in front of 29 Hanbury Street as a 40-year-old man, a little taller than the lady that he was with a brown deerstalker hat and a dark coat, and some particular markings looking as a foreigner. Then we have Albert Cadosh, who lives next door, and he really was only a audible witness or audio witness, and he heard a word no being heard from behind the fence and then a thud against the fence, but apparently that was fairly standard at that period for that individual. From the inquest, Cadosh was asked if it was normal for thumps to be heard against the palings, and he said that it was.
Yes, Doctor?
Because next door were packing case makers.
So, how far along are the investigations into these 2 recent murders?
Everyone around here believes both crimes were committed by the same man. But as for the Hanbury Street and Bucks Row crimes, nobody has heard or seen a thing.
By the way, have you heard of a Dr. Tumblety?
No. Is it important?
Yes. Well, no, maybe. Actually, I don't know. I have heard about this man, his frequent nocturnal outings and bizarre behaviour.
What does this chap look like, Doctor? And where can we find him?
The last I heard was that he was staying at Finley's place, the man who was looking for me a few days ago.
It would greatly assist us if you could ask Finley what your strange associate looks like. We could then see if the description matches any witness accounts.
I will take my leave, Humphreys.
Goodbye, Doctor.
So one of the things which is coming up from the testimony, which is a bit of a problem, is that Cadosh seems to have heard the thump at between 20 past and 5:30, or somewhere in that region. And Elizabeth Long seems to have seen the victim at 5:30, and so therefore their testimonies don't really match. However, we already have a clue as to why this isn't so, and we will be searching through this with Holmes in a little bit.
There is a strong smell of gas. It seems to be coming from the abandoned building. Good evening, Finley. How are you?
Oh, good evening, Doctor. So. And you?
It smells of gas here.
You might say, Doctor. Without wanting to speak ill of the force, I have to wonder if the police are up to something.
What do you mean?
Well, I was outside yesterday evening when the light went out at my place, and a gas smell came from the abandoned building across from my place. And a minute later, the police arrived and were snooping all around like it was them who hid the gas before arriving.
Have things sorted themselves out with your strange tenant?
Don't talk about it, Doctor. That man is truly bizarre. He goes to the most sordid locations once night falls. 3 days ago, my wife told me she saw him come in with blood-stained clothes and a fearsome look.
Interesting. What does he look like, and how old is he?
Oh, he's my age, give or take, so the other side of 50. He's always dressed in a striking manner, with an American hat. He's big, close to 5'11", I'd say. He has a strange voice, not just his accent, see, his voice.
Very well. Goodbye for now, Finley.
Goodbye, Doctor.
Now then, let's go to the police station.
Yes, Doctor.
Tumblety is a man around 5'11", about 55 years old. extravagantly dressed and with a rather distinctive voice. He boards at Finley's. You should know where that is, as the police were there only yesterday. Their arrival coincided with a strange gas leak.
Ah, yes, I know where you mean. Indeed, there was an odd affair with the gas. It was rather unsettling. We were searching for a well-known scoundrel who was ratted out by Squibby, the chap we followed and saved from the pack a few days ago. This thug, no pity Bluto, must have been in the abandoned building in question. But there was no sign of him when we arrived. Furthermore, an inspector said that, given the smell, the thingamabob that supplies gas to the building was probably damaged. So we took no risks and were called away somewhere else.
I will take my leave, Humphreys.
Goodbye, Doctor.
Well, it would seem that I have all the information I need for my investigation. Anyway, this fellow Bluto at the Wasp's Nest is rather shady and doesn't look like he'll want to cooperate. I'd be better off returning to Baker Street. Holmes will certainly know what to do. And besides, I am worn out. There we are, Holmes. I've told you in great detail everything that happened last night.
Excellent work, Watson. We shall now be prepared to answer a few questions about the horrible murder in Hanbury Street.
Do you think we are now in a position to find out the identity of the murderer of these two women?
No, I don't think so. It's outside of our scope and not our responsibility. As much as you've done for Leather Apron and the affair with the pills, our mission is to help the police by ensuring that they don't get caught up following false leads and to point them in the right direction. Let us start from what we know with some certitude. As you have just said, it is almost certain that the same person killed the Bucks Row and Hanbury Street victims. The reason to assume as much are numerous, and I shan't elaborate here. What do these two victims have in common?
It's true these two women were in the same profession, but...
Indeed, Watson, these two women were both prostitutes. That is of vital importance, Watson.
My memory from your examination of the scene is rather hazy. Didn't you say something about the killer's frame of mind?
I was talking about the victim's possessions that were placed on the ground and the rings missing from Annie Chapman's fingers. This killer is a cunning predator, comes from a rather humble background and shows steely self-control in carrying out the murders.
Something is puzzling me, Holmes. Richardson's testimony contradicts the time of death given by Dr. Phillips, which also matches my own, 4:30 a.m.
And yes, we shall confirm that, Watson, and attempt to determine the precise time of death. In order to do that, we will need to place everyone involved on a timeline. Only after that will we be able to place the knife symbolizing our killer. Let's look at our timeline, Watson.
So while I get turned around here, I might as well drop another historical fact.
There is nothing more to do here.
That Holmes's deduction there about the fluids being drained from the corpse is not exactly unique to Holmes here. In fact, Dr. Phillips, or Baxter Phillips, did actually mention that in the future, that his time of death could have been off by some time due to the fact that the body had bled out for so long that it would not have retained its heat in the cold. So there you go, they're actually using some historical data to try and make sense of the whole situation here. I've just added the documents to testimony, and now we're going to go through the timeline and see if we can piece things together.
Let's put the time of death as assessed by Dr. Phillips on the timeline. The assessment of the time of the murder given by Dr. Phillips and yourself, Watson, 4:30 a.m. Now, for the most important part, the testimony of Miss Long. She claims to have seen a woman speaking to a man near 29 Hanbury Street sometime around... What time, Watson? Let us assume, therefore, that Miss Long's testimony is, as is most certainly the case, true. She places her meeting with the victim at around 5:30, claiming to have heard a clock chime on the half hour at the moment when she enters the street.
Now, considering part 1 or 2, when the clue for this came out, was a few months ago, I will be very impressed if anyone can pick up the actual piece of evidence we already have, which can link all this together. However, what we are going to do for the moment is we're going to keep going on with this investigation, and I'm just reading a little bit through Richardson's testimony there because...
Now, let's put the Richardsons' arrival and departure times on the timeline.
Because as you can see here, what's going to happen is that we're going to prove, because of the drainage of fluids, that Richardson can't possibly have been involved, and in fact this is one of the reasons why Richardson was never really a serious suspect in this murder, is the fact that Annie Chapman was not dead when he was at 29 Hanbury Street.
Now, let's put the Richardsons' arrival and departure times on the timeline. Despite the great respect I have for Dr. Phillips and the value I place on our friendship, my deepest conviction is that both of you are mistaken, and that Richardson is in the right, and that these two testimonies put down in writing have real worth.
But how? Explain yourself, Holmes.
Remember how you assessed the time of death? You touched the fingers and body of the victim, but it was remarkably cold for this time of year. In addition, the corpse had been drained of bodily fluids. Its heat retention was therefore no longer the same as that of an intact corpse.
Egad! You're right, Holmes.
Oh, I've had some time to research, Watson.
Given these facts, my first diagnosis may have been off by half an hour, perhaps even an hour.
Thus, we can confirm Richardson's statement and establish that the murder was committed after 4:50 a.m. and not before 4:30 a.m. Our next witness is Albert Cadosh. Albert Cadosh goes down into his garden at approximately 5:20, and on re-entering his home, hears voices in number 29's garden. Let's place this symbol that represents Cadosh on the timeline. Cadosh goes back down into his garden approximately 4 minutes after having left it, and hears the sound of an impact against the wooden fence. Let's place this symbol that represents Cadosh on the timeline. Cadosh leaves the garden, enters his house, then leaves for work, seeing the clock on the Spitalfields church showing 5:32. He left the station at 6 o'clock, and it took us 20 minutes to arrive at Hanbury Street. Our arrival at the scene occurred at around 6:20. Given the distance separating the two locations, we can deduce that the corpse wasn't discovered after 6 o'clock, and therefore that the murder must have been committed before. Excellent, Watson. All our people are now in place.
Yes, but Holmes, Miss Long claims to have seen the victim at around 5:30. But according to Cadosh, someone, most certainly the victim and her murderer, was already in the garden at 5:30.
Excellent observation, Watson. It must be noted, however, that these two witnesses, Long and Cadosh, saw the time shown on the clocks in the area, which are often inaccurate and went by their empirical and, in this case, erroneous estimate of how much time had passed. Thus, neither of these two times can be considered reliable.
Do you mean to say that these two testimonies might match?
Indeed. Let's put Miss Long's meeting with the victim at 2 minutes before 5:30. Let's add Miss Long's meeting with the victim at 2 minutes before 5:30 a.m. Mr. Cadosh claims to have passed by the Spitalfields church at 5:32, which, given the distance from 27 Hanbury Street, would mean he was still at home at 5:31. Let's therefore put the end of his testimony at 5:31. Miss Long heard the man say to the victim, "Will you?" to which the victim responded, "Yes," which would suggest that an agreement was reached and that the transaction was imminent. They then proceeded to enter the garden, which puts the voices heard by Cadosh at 5:29. We had thought that Cadosh had left 27 Hanbury Street at 5:31 after having heard an impact against the fence. Thus, 2 minutes passed between the moment when Cadosh entered the house after having been in the garden the first time and the moment when he returns to go out again and leave for work. How long did he estimate this interval to be? 3 to 4 minutes. In light of all this, Watson, we can finally establish the time of Chapman's murder. Now, place the knife at the exact time.
So congratulations if you thought the clocks in the area might be off. but obviously this has involved a little bit of guesstimation, shall we say, on the timeline, but shall we say reasonable estimation, and certainly something which could be possible at the time.
Now then, taking into account that the local clock isn't exact and that a young man was off by a minute or two in his estimations of his comings and goings, we can confirm Miss Long's testimony and place the time of the crime at approximately 5:30.
But in that case, Holmes, the man that Miss Long saw is none other than...
That's right, Watson. It was the Whitechapel killer.
To think that Miss Long and Cadosh were only a few feet away from him.
Indeed, Watson. Had Miss Long passed just a little closer to the victim and her assassin, or had the young Cadosh popped his head over the fence out of curiosity, the killer would most certainly already be behind bars.
That's some stroke of luck he had there.
I couldn't agree more, Watson. But his luck didn't end there, given the mutilations inflicted upon this poor woman. What must be considered above all is the killer's obvious wish to remove one and only one specific organ. His surgery pinpointed the exact spot, avoiding superfluous incisions. This suggests the man possesses at least a minimal anatomical knowledge.
Are you suggesting a doctor or a butcher?
Perhaps, but the possibilities are still too broad to conclude with any certainty. Now for the motive. Despite my almost complete lack of practical experience on the subject, I have a rather precise idea of the usefulness of a uterus and a vagina. Nonetheless, once they are separated from their usual envelope, I am more circumspect as to the uses one can make of them. What do you think, Watson? We need a board, Watson.
Holmes being as appropriate as ever there. So now what we're going to be looking for...
There is nothing more to do here.
And something that has been debated amongst ripperologists for decades, and now I suppose over a century, is what the motive would be behind committing such horrendous murders. Now, is it something to do with the occupation of the victims, or is it something else? And we're going to be looking into what those potential options could be now.
Perhaps it was intended as a study specimen.
I have little faith in that theory. Hardly anything was taken from the Bucks Row victim.
Black magic?
Watson, this line of investigation is far too vague. We don't have a single clue in support of such a motive. We can eliminate this hypothesis.
Money, quite simply.
Even if this motive seems incongruous, we're in no position to deny or affirm it until we know whether a market for human organs exists.
A desire for some sort of morbid trophy.
I'd be inclined to dismiss this motive. If this were the case, why would nothing have been removed from the Bucks Row victim?
Holmes, what if it was cannibalism?
Even if the idea is unbearable, we can't ignore it as a possibility. Elementary. What emerges from these possible motives for having removed the uterus from the second victim is that they implied that the killer could have carried out the same thing on the Bucks Row victim, yet didn't. This brings us to a terrible conclusion. Our killer has evolved in the space of only a few days, and if that's the case, had he already struck before the first murder to which we attribute him? And if the killer strikes again, what atrocity awaits his next victim?
We have to stop him, Holmes.
We shall do our best. This recent business of jars filled with formalin and of the American doctor might be a lead. Watson, inquire among medical circles to ascertain if there is a black market for human organs. The chances are slim, but this must be pursued.
Very well. What about you, Holmes?
I will send word to Inspector Aberline regarding our recent conclusions. I should also like to become a gas man and pay a visit to Bluto at the Wasp's Nest.
Understood, Holmes. I think one of my old university colleagues who works at the London hospital will be able to help me. I shall write him a note at once. He should be able to see me during the day. Afterwards, shall we meet here?
Yes, Watson. See you later, and good luck.
I must get to the London hospital, where my old university colleague works.
And with that comes the end of the gameplay part of this video. So what we're going to look through now are the notes that Sherlock is going to be sending off to the police. He does these after every single murder. Now, in terms of the Annie Chapman's murder, the main interest that there was around this case was the fact that none of the testimonies matched. However, this was mainly due to some inconsistencies which have been ironed out over time. The inconsistency of Richardson's statement, which was found later on to be true due to the fact that the Dr. Phillips, had given an incorrect time of death, combined with the fact that Elizabeth Long and Albert Cadosh's testimonies didn't quite match up. As Holmes has stated here, there is a possibility, due to the inaccuracies of the time implements in the region, that it's absolutely possible that these testimonies are accurate, and thus the Whitechapel killer was one of the luckiest people that you can ever imagine to get away with this second murder. Now, just going into that, you've got to remember that 29 Hanley Street, he's going into essentially what is a surrounded backyard, so there is very little in the way of an escape there. And the fact that he was seen or heard by not one but two people while the act, or just before the act, was taking place, shows that in this circumstance, as well planned as these murders may have been, or where the killer had anatomical knowledge or not, he certainly had luck on his side. And I think that in this sort of period, and in fact in any period where forensics were even remotely advanced, this may still have gone down as a famous case of a brutal murder, but I don't believe that we would have been struggling very much with who the perpetrator was these days. Sadly though, this took place 135 years ago, and therefore we have not much to work with in the way of police forensics. So while we bring this video to a close, I'm going to go into another individual who's been mentioned an awful lot in this video, and that was Dr. George Bagster Phillips. Dr. Phillips was brought to notoriety during the Whitechapel killings and examined many of the victims. He's also responsible for a couple of the more colourful notes that we are aware of, as anyone who may have studied ripperology. Of course, we've already mentioned that his initial timing of the death of the victim was certainly off by some time due to the fact of the blood being drained from the body. But in addition, because his testimony clashes with that of the written witnesses, this would mean that either Dr. Phillips is making a mistake, or it would mean that the written witnesses are both lying, or being at least somewhat flexible with the truth or the times. Dr. Phillips is also responsible for the statement that obviously it was the work of an expert, or at least one who had such knowledge of anatomical or pathological examinations as to be enabled to secure the pelvic organs with one sweep of the knife. His original opinion was that the body had been dead for 2 hours or more, but obviously this was ratified a little bit later. The doctor did later qualify his statement. So this brings Elizabeth Long and Albert Cadosh's testimony back into the light. However, Phillips has estimated that it would take a lot longer than the time between 5:30, which is when we're estimating that the murder took place, and the time the body was found at about 10 to 6, for the Whitechapel killer to have done all the injuries that were found on Annie Chapman's body. So, and that would be even for someone who is extremely practical. So there are still an awful lot of mysteries surrounding this, and we still cannot be 100% sure of the time of death of Annie Chapman, and therefore we still cannot 100% put into evidence whether Elizabeth Long and Albert Cadosh's testimonies can be taken as hard facts. Now, for the sake of this game, I believe that the way that this is going to go forward is that Sherlock Holmes is going to take his own time period of the death as as accurate as it can be, and we're going to move forward with Elizabeth Long and Albert Cadosh's testimony as if it was eyewitness, or in the case of Albert Cadosh, ear witness, I suppose is the way that you would call it there. Dr. Phillips will appear again in our story as we keep going forward, but for now we will leave him there, and I might do a little bit more of an enhanced bio on him later on. However, we are now going to bring an end to this video, which has mainly been dissolving through evidence, I suppose, and next time we're going to be investigating the rather disturbing thoughts in this game that there may be some kind of human trafficking going on, or human organ trafficking, and Sherlock is also going to confront No Pity Bluto to see what he knows about Francis Tumblety, and maybe that will be something we'll be more interested in. So see you next time.